Our thought for today is the National Weather Service has just published instructions on how to bake lasagna in your mailbox. Another 100-degree day today. Today, we're still in course in ordinary time, working our way through the book of Genesis. We're up to chapter 15, where God is speaking to Abram, who would become Abraham, the father of many nations. And what is the first thing that God says to Abram? Fear not. If you look it up in the Bible, there's 365 times where the Bible tells us, do not be afraid or fear not. Really one for every day of the year. I think God worked that out perfectly. So 365 times he tells us, do not fear. And what is fear? It stands for, false evidence appearing real, or false expectations appearing real. FEAR. Somebody once said it stands for forget everything and run. But fear is something God wants us to overcome by faith. What is faith? Faith stands for fully abandoned into thy hands. FAITH, fully abandoned into thy hands. So God tells Abram, do not be afraid. Why was Abraham fearful? Because he had no children, he had no offspring, he had no descendants. And that was so important, especially in those days, because God had promised Abraham that he would have descendants that would be more numerous than the grains of sand on the seashore or the stars in the sky. And Abraham tells God, or is all of this, all my land going to my servant, my steward Eliezer, who is not his offspring? And God said, no, he will not be your heir. You will have an heir. And then it says, God took Abraham outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars. What's interesting is I never realized that until this morning when I was studying this, that it was daytime and Abraham could not see any stars. The stars are always there, obviously, but you cannot see them because of the daylight. Later on, a few verses later, it says, as the sun was setting, and then it became dark. And then, of course, he could see the stars. But this is a great example of faith, that Abraham was taken outside in broad daylight with the sun, and God says, look up into the sky and count the stars. And he could not see the stars. Remember, faith is walking, our life is walking by faith, not by sight. We don't see the stars, but we know they're there. And so God took him outside and says, thus shall your descendants be. In other words, you can't see them now, but you will see them at one point. So later that night, the sun goes down, and then the stars come out, and then God revealed to Abraham, yes, he would bear a son. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then all the 12 tribes of Israel, which has blessed the entire world. And then this passage concludes by Abraham asking, how can I know that this will occur? And God says, well, make a sacrifice. And he has him bring a 3-year-old heifer, 3-year-old she-goat, 3-year-old ram, turtle dove, and pigeons. And then Abraham prepares them as a sacrifice, but there is no fire. But it says, then after the sun went down, Abraham fell into a trance, and he saw a flaming torch that came. It says, there appeared a smoking fire pot and flaming torch, which passed between these pieces and burned them up as a sacrifice. So God himself provided this flaming torch. It is interesting that over the years, the church has changed this translation. It used to say the flaming brazier, but I think because so many of the lectors would pronounce it the flaming brazier, that the church officially changed it to the flaming torch, so that the lectors don't fall into that problem again. But God worked this miracle of burning up the Holocaust with this flaming torch to prove to Abraham that what God said was true. And then he says, to your descendants will I give all of this land, from the Wadi of Egypt to the great river of the Euphrates. So Abraham is our great father in faith. He trusted in the Lord because, as you know, as I mentioned, faith is a two-sided coin. On one side is faith, believing in God and believing in what he revealed. And the other side of the coin is trusting in God, abandoning ourselves fully into God's hands.